December 1, 1949. Rio Negro, Colombia. A child was born into a world that had nothing to offer him. No money. No power. No future. His father was a farmer. His mother, a schoolteacher. They lived in a small house on the edge of a city that was slowly eating itself alive. The child's name was Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria. Nobody noticed. Nobody cared. 44 years later, that same child would be the most hunted man on the planet. His face plastered on walls from Bogota to Washington, D.C. His name whispered in fear from the streets of Medellin to the halls of the United States Senate. He would command an army. He would bribe presidents. He would blow aircraft out of the sky, but on that cold December morning in 1949, he was just a baby. The question is not how he died. Everyone knows how he died, the question is how he became what he became, and the answer starts in a graveyard. Medellin. 1960s. A city of contrasts. Beautiful mountains. Dangerous streets. A place where poverty was not just a condition, it was a sentence. Pablo Escobar grew up in the barrio of Envigado, on the southern edge of Medellin. The city was expanding fast, fueled by industry and ambition. But for boys like Pablo, the expansion meant nothing. The wealth moved in one direction. Always away from them. He was the third of 7 children. Quiet. Observant. Always watching. His mother, Hermilda, believed in education. She wanted Pablo to become someone. A doctor. A lawyer. A politician. She pushed him hard. Took him to school. Talked about the future like it was something you could reach out and grab. His father, Abel, worked the land. Rose before dawn. Came home exhausted. Said little. Pablo watched both of them. And he understood something early. Something most people don't understand until it is too late. Hard work doesn't make you rich. It keeps you poor. He dropped out of high school at 16. Not because he was stupid, because he was smarter than the system around him. He could see the math clearly. Stay in school, get a small job, work 40 years, die with nothing. Or find another way. Pablo Escobar chose another way. He started small. The way all legends start, stolen tombstones. It sounds almost absurd. But this was the logic of a boy who had nothing and understood everything. Graveyards in Colombia were filled with expensive stone markers. Families paid for them. They sat there. Nobody guarded them. Pablo and his cousin Gustavo Gaviria would slip in at night, steal the tombstones, sandblast the inscriptions clean, and sell them back to stonemasons. It was not glamorous. It was not violent. It was efficient. That was always Pablo's gift. Efficiency. He saw the shortest line between 2 points and he walked it. No hesitation. No sentiment. From tombstones, he moved to cars. He became a car thief in his early teens. Running with gangs in the streets of Medellin, learning the rules of a world that operated outside the law. The police knew his face. His name appeared in their files. Juvenile delinquent. Petty criminal. They had no idea what was coming, because Pablo Escobar was not a petty criminal. He was a student. And Medellin was his classroom. 1. Medellin. Pablo Escobar was 21 years old, and he had already decided that kidnapping paid better than car theft. His most famous early victim was a businessman named Diego Echevarria. A wealthy man. The kind of man whose existence Pablo had watched from a distance his whole life. Echevarria moved through the world like it belonged to him, because for men like him, it did. Pablo's crew snatched him off the street. Held him. Sent a message to the family. The ransom was $50,000, the family paid. Echevarria did not survive. Pablo collected the money, looked at the $50,000, and felt something shift inside him. Not guilt. Not hesitation, clarity. This was the world he wanted. Not the world of farms and classrooms and slow poverty. This world. Where decisions were made in seconds. Where power was measured in fear. Where money moved in ways the textbooks never described. He was 21 years old and already a killer, but $50,000 was not enough. Pablo Escobar never thought small for long. Mid-1970s. The cocaine era begins. For decades, Colombia had been a marijuana country. The geography was perfect, warm climate, remote mountains, easy access to shipping routes. Colombian smugglers had built sophisticated networks moving marijuana north into the United States. They had the contacts. They had the infrastructure. They had the relationships with distributors across Florida and California. Then cocaine arrived, not Colombian cocaine, at first. The drug was being processed in Chile, Peru, and Bolivia, countries with the coca leaf supply and the chemical knowledge to convert it into powder. But the Colombian smugglers saw an opportunity immediately. They had something the Bolivians and Peruvians didn't have. A highway to America. They began importing raw coca paste from the south, converting it in Colombian labs into cocaine hydrochloride, and then routing it north through the Caribbean, using island chains as transfer points before pushing the product into southern Florida. The money was extraordinary. Cocaine was worth more per kilo than almost anything on earth. And America, in the 1970s, was hungry for it. The demand was not just there, it was growing. Every month. Every year. A tidal wave of appetite building on the other side of the ocean, Pablo Escobar saw the wave. In 1976, he entered the cocaine business. He was 26 years old. He would never look back. May 1976. Medellin, the Colombian Security Service, the DAS, arrested Pablo Escobar on his return from Ecuador. They found 39 kilograms of cocaine hidden in the spare tire of his car. It was a serious charge. The kind of charge that puts a man away for years. Pablo Escobar looked at the situation with the same cold calculation he had applied to tombstones, to kidnappings, to everything else in his life. He identified the problem. He identified the solution. He acted. He bribed the second judge on the case. The charges disappeared. Pablo walked free, and then, because he could not afford witnesses, he had the police officers who arrested him killed, all of them. This was the moment Pablo Escobar announced to Colombia what he was. Not just a criminal. Not just a smuggler. Something different. Something the country had never truly encountered before. A man who believed the law applied to other people. His philosophy was already forming. He would name it himself, years later. 2 words. Simple. Absolute. Plata o plomo, silver or lead, take the bribe. Or take the bullet. There was no third option. There was no negotiation. There was no appeal. Every judge, every politician, every police chief, every journalist in Colombia would eventually face that choice. And Pablo Escobar had decided, before they even knew he existed, how that choice would end. Late 1970s. The network expands. Pablo Escobar did not build his empire alone. He was smart enough to know that no man builds alone. The great criminal enterprises of history, the ones that last, the ones that grow into something monstrous, are built on partnerships. On loyalty. On finding the right people and binding them to you before someone else does. Pablo's inner circle was small. Tight. His cousin Gustavo Gaviria, who had stolen tombstones with him as a boy, became his most trusted partner. They had grown up together. They understood each other without words. Gustavo handled logistics, money, the mechanical parts of the operation that required precision without flair. Then there were the other founding partners. Carlos Leder, brilliant, erratic, visionary. Leder had an idea that would change everything. Instead of using single planes to move small quantities of cocaine into the United States, why not use an island? A private island in the Bahamas, positioned between Colombia and Florida, functioning as a hub. A refueling point. A massive transfer station where cocaine could be moved in bulk quantities impossible with individual flights. The island was called Norman's Cay. Remote. Quiet. Surrounded by water, Leder and Escobar purchased most of it. Built a runway. A warehouse. A harbor. They brought in boats and aircraft. They constructed refrigerated storage for the cocaine. From 1978 to 1982, Norman's Cay was the beating heart of the Medellin cartel's operation. Tons of cocaine flowed through that tiny island on their way to the most lucrative drug market in human history, the United States of America. Early 1980s. America discovers cocaine. By 1985, 8 million Americans were using cocaine regularly. 8 million. The number is almost impossible to absorb. 8 million people with a habit that cost hundreds of dollars a week. 8 million people funneling money south, through distribution networks, through middlemen, through the Caribbean, back into the hands of Pablo Escobar and his partners. The economics were staggering. Cocaine had become something it had never been before in American history. It had become fashionable. The drug of success. The drug of Wall Street traders and Hollywood producers and nightclub owners and professional athletes. If you had money in America in the early 1980s, cocaine was what you did with it. You were not part of the right crowd unless you had large quantities. Unless you used large quantities. It was a fad. An epidemic dressed up as a status symbol, and the Colombian criminals were, as investigators would later describe them, some of the most economically astute operators in the world. They understood supply and demand with the precision of business school graduates. There was a market. Nobody was filling it. Colombia had the geography, the infrastructure, and the networks. So Colombia jumped in. By the mid-1980s, Pablo Escobar's organization was responsible for an estimated 70 to 80 tons of cocaine entering the United States every single month, not per year, per month. The money generated by this volume of trade was so large that Pablo Escobar had a problem that no criminal in history had ever encountered at quite this scale. He couldn't count it fast enough. Accountants working for the cartel would later estimate that Pablo was spending $10 million a year just on rubber bands. The bands used to bundle the cash. The stacks were too large, too numerous to process properly. Rats ate through billions of dollars in storage. Moisture destroyed warehouses full of bills. Money was being lost simply because there was too much of it to manage. Forbes magazine published its annual list of the world's wealthiest individuals. Pablo Escobar's name appeared near the top. He was not a millionaire. He was a billionaire. In a country where the average worker earned less than $1,000 a year, Pablo Escobar was worth $30 billion. The number did not represent success. It represented a different category of human existence. The estate in the hills, with $30 billion, Pablo Escobar built a world, not a house. Not an estate. A world. Hacienda Napola sat in the hills of Antioquia, roughly 200 kilometers from Medellin. The property covered more than 3,000 acres of Colombian countryside. It had taken years and tens of millions of dollars to build. The entrance was announced by a small plane mounted above the gate. The plane was a tribute, a replica of the aircraft Pablo had used to fly his first cocaine shipment into the United States. A monument to the moment everything changed. Inside the gates, the estate unfolded in every direction. 9 man-made lakes. A private airport with a full runway. Soccer fields with floodlights. A bullring for corridas. A private zoo, not a small collection of common animals, but an actual zoo, stocked with hippos, elephants, giraffes, and exotic birds brought in from Africa and South America. Life-sized fiberglass dinosaurs stood in the fields, visible from the air. Water slides. Swimming pools. Guest houses and private residences scattered across the property like a private village. American investigators who later visited the estate could barely process what they were seeing. The scale of it. The deliberateness of it. Every dollar of it built on cocaine. On death. On the broken bodies of the addicted and the murdered. It made them angry, not just professionally angry. Personally angry, because the mortar and concrete of every wall in that complex had come from suffering. From the pregnant woman whose husband died for a $50 debt to Pablo's collectors. From the family in Miami whose son had overdosed in a bathroom at 22. From the Colombian judge who had refused the bribe and received the bullet instead. The estate was beautiful. Genuinely, undeniably beautiful. That was the worst part. The Robin Hood of Medellin, Pablo Escobar understood something that most criminals never grasp: power without popularity is fragile. It lasts only as long as your enemies are afraid of you. But popularity creates something stronger. It creates loyalty. It creates a buffer between you and the state. It creates 1,000 pairs of eyes on the streets that will never report you, never cooperate with investigators, never point the police in your direction. Pablo wanted that buffer. So he built it. With a fraction of his cocaine billions, Pablo Escobar constructed entire neighborhoods for the poor of Medellin. He built football pitches and lit them with floodlights so children could play at night. He paid for hospitals in barrios that had never had medical care. He funded food banks. He handed out cash at public events, throwing money into crowds from the windows of his cars. The people of Medellin's poorest neighborhoods worshipped him. They called him El Patron. The boss. And something else, the Robin Hood of Medellin. The comparison was not entirely wrong. He did take from the rich, or at least from the rich Americans who were paying his prices. And he did give to the poor, in the most visible, theatrical ways possible, but investigators saw it differently. Pablo Escobar was not motivated by generosity. He was motivated by survival. The charity was not altruism. It was investment. Every house he built in a Medellin slum purchased 100 pairs of loyal eyes. Every football pitch bought the silence of a neighborhood. Every food bank converted another block of the city into territory where no informant would dare operate against him. He exploited poverty with brilliant cynicism. He made people love him for it, and love, Pablo understood, was the most powerful protection of all. 1. The politician. By 1982, Pablo Escobar had more money than any single person could spend in a lifetime. He had an army. He had infrastructure. He had half of Medellin eating from his hand, but he wanted more. He wanted legitimacy. The Colombian congressional elections of 1982 offered an opportunity. Pablo threw his money and his popular support behind a campaign for a seat as an alternate member of the Chamber of Representatives, aligned with the Liberal Party. He won. With one stroke, Pablo Escobar had crossed the line from criminal to politician. From fugitive to congressman. The seat came with one prize he wanted above all others: parliamentary immunity, immunity from prosecution for past crimes. The shield of political office, protecting everything he had done and everything he intended to do. He took his seat in the Chamber of Representatives on July 20, 1982. For a brief, extraordinary moment, Pablo Escobar was both the most powerful drug lord in the world and a sitting member of the Colombian government. It could not last. The Colombian state had enemies of its own, men and women who saw what Pablo was and refused to look away. One of them was the Justice Minister, Rodrigo Lara Bonilla. A serious man. A brave man. The kind of man who read a file on Pablo Escobar and did not reach for the phone number of a lawyer or a fixer. He reached for a podium. In April 1984, Lara Bonilla stood before the Colombian Congress and accused Pablo Escobar directly. Not in whispers. Not through intermediaries. Publicly. Formally. On the record: bribery. Corruption. Drug trafficking. He named names. He cited evidence. He looked into the cameras and said what everyone in Colombia already knew, but no one in power had dared to say: Pablo Escobar was a criminal. The reaction from Escobar's camp was immediate and furious. His allies in Congress denounced Lara Bonilla. His lawyers threatened legal action. The machinery of money and intimidation began to move. It was too late. The accusation stuck. Parliamentary immunity was stripped. The political career ended, but the real response came later. It always did. April 30, 1984. Bogotá, Rodrigo Lara Bonilla left his office. A motorcycle followed his car through the streets of Bogotá. Steady. Patient. Waiting for the right moment. When the car reached the right stretch of road, the motorcycle accelerated and moved alongside. The passenger raised a weapon. An Ingram submachine gun that he fired into the car window. Lara Bonilla was hit multiple times in the head. The shooter was 16 years old, the driver was 19. The Justice Minister of Colombia was dead, and with that murder, a cabinet minister, a government official, a man who had simply told the truth. Pablo Escobar had changed the nature of his war. He had not just killed a man. He had declared war on the Colombian state itself, every president, every senator, every judge, every journalist. They all heard the message. No one is protected. No one is safe. Lara Bonilla's murder sent shockwaves through a country that had seen violence for generations but had never seen anything like this. The government of Colombia, stunned and furious, pushed back hard. Extradition treaties with the United States were activated. Warrants were issued. The full weight of the state, however imperfect and compromised, began to turn against Pablo Escobar. He had held political immunity in his hands. He had traded it for a murder, and something inside him changed that day. The calculation that had always governed him, the cold efficiency of a man who weighed risk against reward and chose the optimal path, began to break down. Something rawer emerged. Something less controlled. Violence became, as those who watched him would later describe it, his cause célèbre of the day. That if you were in his way, you were getting shot. The monster that had always lived inside Pablo Escobar stopped waiting for reasons to appear. It simply began to move. Medellín. The killing fields. There is a particular kind of horror that settles over a city when violence becomes ordinary, not the horror of a single terrible event. The horror of a week, a month, a year of terrible events. Until the terrible becomes unremarkable. Until you stop counting. Medellín, by the mid-1980s, had reached that place. Foreign journalists arriving for the first time described the same experience. The city was beautiful. Physically stunning. Mountain views. Modern architecture. Skyscrapers and commerce and the energy of a place building itself into the future. Then they stayed a week, and they started seeing bodies. In the mornings. On the side of the road. In vacant lots. At bus stops. The police and local authorities could not keep up with the pace of killing. Cadavers lay where they fell for hours, sometimes all day, before anyone came to collect them. Not from callousness. From sheer volume. Medellín became, during this period, the murder capital of Colombia. By some metrics, the murder capital of the world. Pablo Escobar had not built this alone. The cartels, the rival gangs, the sicarios, the teenage assassins who became the most visible symbols of Medellín's collapse, were the product of decades of poverty, corruption, and neglect. Pablo had not created the conditions, but he had weaponized them. He paid 16-year-old boys from the barrios to kill police officers. The rate was $700 per officer. Flat fee. No questions. No complications. The boys took the money and went to work. Within 15 days of Pablo instituting this policy, 30 members of the Colombian police's elite search unit had been murdered. By the end of 1991, 457 police officers would be killed in Medellín alone. 457. The DEA agents working in Colombia during this period would later speak about it in tones that had nothing to do with professional distance. One senior agent described attending the funeral of a colleague. Standing close to the casket. The smell was overwhelming. Colombian custom did not involve embalming. A woman was hanging on to the casket, 8 months pregnant, sobbing, dragging a 2-year-old child with her other hand. He went home and cried. This was the world Pablo Escobar had made, not just for his enemies. For everyone. The Forbes list and the question nobody asked. In the middle of all of this, the murders, the bombings, the rivers of cocaine flowing north, Forbes magazine published its ranking of the world's wealthiest individuals. Pablo Escobar appeared near the top. The magazine published his estimated net worth. $30 billion. His photograph. A brief description of his business activities, appropriately vague. For a moment, the world processed this information and moved on. He was one of the richest men alive. The magazine noted this. Readers noted this. And then they turned the page. Nobody asked the obvious question, where did the $30 billion come from? Not because they didn't know. Because the knowledge was already too large, too pervasive, too woven into the fabric of international commerce to be confronted directly. The banks that handled Pablo Escobar's money, and there were many, from Panama to Luxembourg to Miami, knew where the money came from. The politicians who accepted his contributions knew. The Americans who were buying his product, by the millions, every week, knew the $30 billion represented something larger than one man's criminality. It represented a system. A global system of demand, supply, transport, finance, and willful blindness that stretched from the coca fields of Bolivia to the nightclubs of New York. Pablo Escobar sat at the center of that system, not because he was uniquely evil. Not because he was the only man capable of doing what he did, but because he had been born in the right country, at the right moment, with the right kind of mind. Cold. Patient. Efficient. Capable of extraordinary violence and extraordinary calculation in equal measure. He had understood, from the time he was stealing tombstones at 14 years old, that the world was divided into two kinds of people, the people who made the rules, and the people who broke them. He had chosen, without hesitation, which kind he would be, and for nearly 2 decades. Through the bribery and the terror and the cocaine and the murders, Pablo Escobar had been the most powerful rule-breaker the world had ever produced. But every rule has a breaking point, even Pablo's. The death of Rodrigo Lara Bonilla had set something in motion that Pablo could not stop, could not bribe, could not outrun. The Colombian state, wounded and enraged, had allied itself with the United States government and its most relentless investigators. The DEA was coming. The elite search bloc was being assembled. And high above the mountains of Colombia, aircraft equipped with the most sophisticated radio direction finding technology in existence were being prepared for a mission that would take years but would end in only one way. Pablo Escobar, the boy from the graveyard, the man who had turned $30 billion into fear, would eventually face the same choice he had offered to everyone else, plata o plomo, except for Pablo. There would be no bribe large enough, and the bullet was already on its way.